Welcome back and Happy New Year. Today we're going to take a look at the TRN T300, which is TRN's brand new hybrid wireless set, also featuring a new Qualcomm chipset featuring Bluetooth 5.2. So lots of new stuff in this one and a lot of things to go over, but I do want to thank the Luck LZ Audio Store and AliExpress for shipping this one out to me. If you go look today, this one's about $75.80. which is up there in price. No way to get around that this one is a bit pricey. And part of that price comes from the brand new Qualcomm chip, which we'll talk about in a bit, featuring 5.2 and aptX. And all these things have, the chip costs a bit of money. The licensing fee for aptX, I heard, costs some money. So again, that kind of drives the price up a little bit. So before we jump into it, I will say that my brain is still on holiday, so there's lots of notes here, so don't fear about that. That's just to keep me on some kind of track. So this is the packaging that it comes in, TRN T300, and if you look really closely, it says it's a 2DD 1BA. So slight misprint on the packaging. It's actually a 1DD 2BA. I wouldn't mind a 2DD 1BA. That would be a bit of fun as well. So this is the case that it comes in. It looks kind of fine from the top. It's a little tall, it's a little big, but what you get for that is you get a nice USB-C on the back and wireless charging on the bottom. So that's a bit unique and in line with the price as well. So if we open it up, inside the case you actually get a case power, and then you get individual bud power, which is actually kind of handy, especially when you're running low. So if we look at each one of these guys, or at least one of them, so this matte black is actually almost a rubberized plastic. If you bought enough electronics, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So it looks matte, but it actually has a little stick to it, so just a bit tacky. And I love that coating as it keeps things from sliding around. So I thought that was kind of an interesting coating to put on an earbud, and I think it works really well. So on the back, get the little left-right indicator. It's actually quite comfortable. It's not too big, not too small. It's just about right for me. So tip-wise, these are AZLA SednaEarfit shorts. For those of you who have been following me for a little while, I like the AZLA Sednas on the regular size. These are the shorts, which are actually made for TWS, and the advantage of the shorts is that you can actually put it back in the case and it still charges. The normal earfits may or may not charge depending on the case itself, but on these, one, you get great sound, nice bass control, plus it actually fits back in the case, which is a huge bonus for me. So I really love those tips. I actually bought them just as this one was arriving, and I thought it was a good excuse to spend $15 on ear tips again. So let's kind of start and get into it. So TRN T300, 1DD, 2BA, TWS, and for me, what you notice immediately when you put this one in your ears, it actually sounds like a TRN IEM. And I will call this a wireless TRN IEM as opposed to a TWS that happens to sound like an IEM. There's a subtle difference. And I think this one, there's sort of no mistaking that TRN and their signature are stamped in this one. There's lots of TRN DNA in that sound signature. And usually, especially in the budget TWSs, and I've tried a few of them, not a ton of them, but you sort of get lucky on some of them, and some of them resemble a normal IEM that you're used to. And some of them just are tuned for a more general purpose, whether that's for podcasts or gaming or calls. That signature is slightly different than what you see in a primarily music-centric signature. And this one is sort of unmistakable TRN IEM. And so I think kind of kudos to those guys for really pulling off a TRN hybrid that happens to be wireless as opposed to a wireless that just happens to sound good. So kind of my first thought was it really, really sounds really good. And that was a lot of reallys, but it does. Very likable, very enjoyable, very TRN signature that will be very familiar to a lot of you. So as I said, this one is featuring the new Qualcomm 3046 Bluetooth 5.2 chip. Features wireless charging, IPX5, water resistance, and battery life is, I hit about 4 hours and I was getting the low battery warning. So maybe you can go a little bit above 4. I hit 4, probably 4 and 5 minutes or so, and that was when I got the low battery warning. So it can probably go a little bit beyond the warning, but I tend to stop when she starts chirping in my ear. So sound-wise, this is a fun, smooth, spacious V-shape, but not over or underdone, sort of on any of the edges. There's not too much bass, there's not too much treble, there's not recessed mids. Some of these things that we associate with TRN, especially in 2020, these strong upper mids or a recessed midsection, not so much on this one. I think it's done really, really well. And so another small point that makes more sense for me is that these sound really great loud, and I tend to wear TWS outside, and there's probably power tools involved, like you're mowing the lawn or something, and I tend to turn it up louder than I would in the house, and it's really nice for me to have a pair that sound great loud, and these in fact do, and a lot of that's because it doesn't have this peaky hot upper mids or hot treble. It's just more polite, and as you turn it up, it just sounds just as good as it does at lower volumes. And it does sound really great at lower volumes too, but and it's especially in TWS, I look for something that sounds great loud. So the bass is very TRN dynamic, and if you've ever graphed or look at a graph on a TRN, they tend to have a larger graph, but then when you listen to it, especially in the bass section, the bass tends to be, it can actually get up, it's sort of a potential. It will hit those high bass levels, but in general, the bass tends to try to stay at a lower level. It tends to hit and hide almost. And this one is very much in that line. If you give it a song with a very strong bass line, you'll hear that. It won't go nearly as deep in the sub bass. It's not extended so much in the sub as it is. The mid hits much harder than the sub is extended. So punchy is what I would call it. But it tends to not be persistent and hang around longer than it should. And it all leads to this very dynamic bass where plenty of bass when you need it. When you don't need it, it tends to, go away and you end up with a very clean midsection. So like I said, the benefit of this dynamic bass and one that doesn't necessarily go, it's a little faster and it doesn't go nearly as deep in the sub bass, is you end up with something cleaner and tighter, more controlled. And like I said, it sounds just like a TRN, but you don't have a ton of that bleed throughout the midsection because it's going to decay out pretty quick. And so one song that popped up new last week, I think, was KLF's 3 AM Eternal Live on Solid State Logic 1. It's an old classic EDM dance song. I used to listen to the KLF back in the 90s. So that one sort of piqued my interest because I haven't heard a new KLF track in a long time, but it's definitely a classic track. And so not so much a bass head track. It's very much a punchy bass sound. And this recording itself is a little bassier than the normal one. And it just kind of caught my ear like, oh, that sounds actually pretty good. And you don't get that deep sub-bass rumble that you sometimes get on a TWS, but then it tends to cloud your midsection. This one sort of stays at about the punchy bass. You're not going to miss it unless you're really looking for that deep rumble, but there's more than enough punch there to kind of get through most bass tracks. So good one. Good band to check out if you haven't checked it out before. So the mids have this nice warmth to it, and especially on the 2020 TRNs, it was sort of a half and half of are the vocals in the midsections too thin? Is the upper midsection too hot? Is it a nasally sound? Is it a thin section? I think they did this one right, and you get a little bass into the midsection. It creates this nice warmth. Everything has a really nice weight to it. Not nearly as recessed as I was expecting. It's much more in line with the VX and the BA5, which had a much forward midsection as opposed to the V90, which had this more recessed section. I would call this one more natural, more detailed than I had expected. So considering it's two BAs and the BAs are actually in the nozzle, it sounds surprisingly non-metallic. And I know TRN had talked about this technique in on the V90S. They were trying to bring I think the upper mids down a little bit, so you didn't have that emphasis on the metallic side of the BAs, and whether the BA is slightly changed or they're using some technique, but it surprisingly sounds quite natural for two BAs, and maybe they're not budget BAs, maybe they're more expensive, and maybe that's why the price is the price, but TRN did something there that actually worked really well, and it worked better for me than what they said they were doing on the V90S. On the T300, it actually sounds quite natural, and there's not any of these, kind of off the bat timbre problems. The cymbals kind of sound like cymbals. They don't sound overly metallic, which was really nice. And so the bass gives you this nice weight, as I mentioned. So nice track, Rather Be. This is an acoustic cover by Jasmine Thompson, and it's a pretty typical acoustic cover if you ever listen to those. Female with a beautiful voice, singing with a guitar, and doing a cover of a popular song. And this one starts out just like that, but her voice is sort of big. There's a big vocal image. It's very close. It's intimate, textured, detailed, all those things that you're looking for on a female vocal right there. And it's very close in and very intimate. And then the guitar sounds, like I said, it's just not overly metallic. There isn't a heavy low end to it. It's not like resonating in your ear like you get on some lower end guitars. It's just kind of right. And I think it kind of goes back to this dynamic bass as well. It just sounds really good. And then as the song goes on a little bit, the bass kicks in and you get this nice little lower shelf of bass that's just complementing everything and has a really nice texture to it. And then all the other instruments come in and you get this sense of how big the soundstage is on the T300. And the first you'll notice is her voice is actually lifted up a little bit. It's a little tall, and the guitar, I think, was over to the left. And then as all the other instruments fill in, you kind of get this real 180-degree field of sound, and really, really nice. And there's so much space between the instruments that you're not really fighting to hear details behind her vocals because the instruments are off to the side or up a little bit. There's lots of really nice things happening in the staging on this one, especially for a TWS. The staging comes across really, really well, and all that just creates this nice midsection that works really well. It's the sweet spot of this one, and the bass, not bad, but really, especially female vocals, right in the sweet spot in this one, and that's why that song, Rather Be by Jasmine Thompson, works really well on this pair. So Treble, it's got really great extension and a very polite level. Like I said, you can turn it up quite high, and like I said, I listen to louder music, especially EDM stuff, when I'm doing lawn work. So Breaking a Sweat by Skrillex, which is one of those songs that gets annoying and fatiguing quite quickly with something that has an elevated treble level or even an upper mid level. Both of those will hit you right in the ear pretty quickly on that song. And this one, it's not treble head levels. It's very much a polite control level, and I think that works really well with this set. I think it was a really great choice to not really push that in like I did on, say, the VX or even the BA, and have a little more emphasis out there. I think on this one, to have this polite level and a bass that doesn't go as deep, I think the two work in conjunction really well together, and they feel balanced, and nothing is just out of place with this one. Just really, really nice. So lastly, like I said, the staging and imaging is much more like the VX or the BA5. If you have either of those and you know how wide that soundstage is, it's very much the same on this T300. And it feels very much like a 180-degree, very spacious, lots of space in between the instruments, big vocal image, really, really nice. And no complaints there. I mean, there's some depth to it. There's not a ton of depth to it, but considering we've got one DD and two BAs, I think, it's a hybrid that sounds as detailed and as spacious with soundstage as it should be, considering the number of drivers. I think they did a very good job with what they had, and between the tuning and the hardware and everything else, it's just a really nice package. So again, thank you guys for tuning in, and Happy New Year, and we'll move on to the next one and work through 2021 or 2021 as we did in 2020. So again, thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you next time.